Well, it's not quite Jean-Michel Jarre, but we are trying to give you the question time experience here at Cliveden. It's lovely to have such a good crowd for our Cliveden question time. I'm Emily Maitlis, and on our panel today we have the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, the Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Alex Burghart, Emily Benn, Director of Hakluyt and Chair of the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, who has postponed her honeymoon to be here with us this afternoon. That is the Cliveden poll. And Lord Charles Moore, authorised biographer of Margaret Thatcher, columnist and ex-editor of The Telegraph and The Spectator. Now, a little bit earlier, we asked our audience to submit questions, and we're hoping that we've been able to contact those of you who did, so that you can ask those questions live. We're all sort of keeping our fingers crossed you've come back to us. If that happens, then expect a very light touch from me, because this is a conversation between all of you and with our panellists, and we'll open it up to the floor for those of you who haven't got in their questions earlier to be able to ask our guests whatever you like. Normally on question time at this point, we'd give you a sort of potted history of the house or the history or the market town. But in a break with convention, I'm just going to say very simply that one of our panellists has a rather unusual connection to Cliveden, or should I say its past history of scandal. Wes, shall I let you explain?
Yeah, OK. No, actually, you need to buy the book. Yes. I was actually going to say, I don't know how Emily's honeymoon's going to match up to Cliveden, is the first...
Ask my husband.
I was going to say, is Emily Benn, so it's very likely to live up. But I think, so, yes, I've been banned from swimming in the Cliveden pool because it's very famous, of course, for being the pool that Christine Keeler famously swam in. And my grandmother shared a cell with Christine Keeler. So they actually became lifelong friends. In fact, after they were released from prison, my grandmother had dark hair, very strong cheekbones, and there were occasions where Christine would give her clothes to my grandmother, who would play decoy to the paparazzi. So one day when I'm retired, I'm going to spend some time in the Getty archives just to see how many photos of my grandmother appear under the tagline Christine Keeler. Fantastic. So that's my Cliveden connection.
Brilliant. We're going to see if Timothy Byers is in the room. Timothy, are you here? Yeah. Oh, brilliant. Do you remember your question, and are you happy to ask it? All right. Luckily, here's one I prepared. But this is Timothy Byers in his own words. Should we be concerned that immigration, rather than the economy, is now the #1 issue for both the government and the public alike? Is this more the fault of Brexit or the transatlantic Trump effect? Alex, I'm going to go to you first.
So I think that there are three things that are happening at the moment, or that have been emerging for some time, that are a really quite heady cocktail. And I say this as a former history teacher, that if you look at where we are in societal terms and economic terms right now, what we have are 20 years during which the median family in this country has gotten poorer, like noticeably poorer. They feel poorer. And that's sort of the after effects, the ongoing after effects of 2008, and the pressures that have built up internationally since. The second issue is absolutely unparalleled high immigration, much higher net immigration than ever before in our history. And the third thing is now social media, which is enabling people to communicate good and bad things with each other at an unprecedented rate. When you put those three things together, you get a very challenging set of problems for politics to work through. But it absolutely needs to work through them. We have to come up with it's incumbent on all politicians, all backgrounds, to come up with a suite of policies that will make ordinary people be better off. It will bring down the cost of living and bring up their wages and make sure that they have jobs. And we absolutely have to bring down very high levels of net migration. And we also have to learn to live with this incredibly potent new technology. So I think that's where we are and a little bit about how we got there.
Can we just go back to you, Timothy, for why you asked that question? Because the way you phrased it was, should we be concerned that immigration rather than the economy is now the number one issue? Do you not think it should be the number one issue, or do you not agree that it is? Just to get your sense of it.
No, I don't think it should be. I mean, I understand everybody's concern about immigration and how the levels of it, but I think it sort of affects the whole society, our obsession about immigration, when I think there are far more important things.
Wes, would you agree that we have become obsessed with immigration over other things that we should be prioritising?
Well, it's been consistently among the top 3 issues that the public are concerned about. And it's understandable why, because you look at levels of net migration in this country, and objectively they are far too high. We are over-reliant on overseas recruitment to plug skills shortages in our country because we haven't invested enough in the skills of our own people. We see that reflected particularly in health and social care, where the extent of our underinvestment in opportunities for our own people are not just leading to an over-reliance on overseas recruitment, but in some cases unethical recruitment from countries on the WHO's red list that have severe shortages of their own health and care workers and desperately need them. We're taking them, and I think that is unethical. But also an unwise over-reliance, because we're in a globally competitive market, and so the assumption that you will always be able to recruit from overseas is risky. So I think on that score, we've got more to do to bring down levels of net migration, to make sure we're investing in homegrown talent, and to reassure people that we have manageable numbers of people coming into the country. Then there's the question of the boats, and that sense that successive governments have lost control on this issue. And take back control is unquestionably the most powerful political slogan we've seen in post-war British politics. And so I think there are quite legitimate concerns about that and how we get a grip on it. So I think the public aren't in an unreasonable place on those first 2 issues. However, there's a danger that we shoot ourselves in the foot in much the same way as we did when the country voted to leave the European Union. I think it would be a really bad thing for Britain if we became a country that global talents did not want to come to. And in some ways, Britain being a desired destination for people from around the world is a measure of our success. And the day that people no longer want to come to this country, we should all be quite concerned. And also, we want to be a place that attracts the brightest minds, whether they're coming to work in the UK or study in the UK. And I'm concerned about the extent to which we are only discussing immigration through the lens of problems and challenges, and not recognising the positive benefits that immigration has brought to this country in recent years and, in fact, over the last century. And then finally, we're seeing legitimate anxieties about immigration whipped up to cause fear and division. And I don't know what happened over the summer, but I went to Italy for a week. And when I came back, it was as if the country had lost its mind. And hanging from the bridges over motorways on the drive down to Cornwall, where we were going to visit some families, were lots of our country's flags, in many cases hung upside down, which I think is outrageous, especially from self-proclaimed patriots. Please learn to hang the Union flag the right way up. But more seriously, what concerned me is that flag wasn't hung because there's a World Cup or a European Championship or Eurovision. It was hung to basically say that that flag is only there for people who look like me and is not there for people who have skin colour or religion that is different to mine as a white Christian.
You think the hanging of the flag was a divisive act? Yes,
it was basically designed to say, this is our country for people who look like me and worship the same religion as me, and if you're neither of those 2 things, then this country doesn't really belong to you. And the direct impact of that has been people in my constituency on the London-Essex border, many of whom were born in this country, but who look different and worship a different God, feeling like this country is no longer safe or welcoming to them. And I think that is outrageous. We should acknowledge it and we should challenge it.
OK, I'm going to come back to our panellists in a second. This is not a nationally representative audience necessarily, but just to get a sense, if I said immigration first and economy second, and you have to choose which of those is more important to you, who would put their hand up and say immigration is my top priority? OK? And who would say economy? And if I added health into that... OK. Interestingly, I mean, the YouGov poll has immigration first, except amongst young voters. So you can take
very
that crowd. You're a very young audience, exactly. 18 to 24 put the economy first. Emily, do you want to hear the government do more to bring down immigration, or do you want to hear Wes and the Labour government push back on the narrative?
I think you have to push back on some of the narrative precisely for the reasons that Wes explained. But when you talk about immigration and the economy, you sort of have to acknowledge the reality of the fact that in most recent years, our economy has only grown because of net migration. That is what the figures show us, because we have some fundamental problems in the economy, the unproductive nature of it, the number of economically inactive people. There are all of these sort of root problems of the cost of living crisis, the post-2008 hangover, which we still have nowhere near recovered from. We should start having some sort of brutally honest conversations about the state of the British economy and how it needs to be fixed. And when politicians talk about the sort of hard decisions that will entail, making people more productive, tackling public sector reform at a serious level to manage the sort of fiscal situation that we find ourselves in, this conversation always seems to stop after we need to make difficult decisions and there are going to be difficult things to do. We then don't have the argument about really what that means in reality and how difficult it's going to be. And so we find ourselves still facing the same problems that we were a few years ago with no meaningful policy change to have sort of actually tackled them. So, look, I wouldn't be here without immigration. Literally half of me wouldn't be here without immigration. So I'm a living advert for, people around the world that wanted to come to Britain, build their lives, build wonderful, productive families, economically contributive and incredibly important culturally. I look at the students at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama. We have people from all over the world, how brilliant it is they want to come to London to learn and to be part of a brilliant global community with the best future talent here in Britain. That is unquestionably a brilliant thing about our country, and to Wes's point, we should celebrate it.
Charles, do you think we should be celebrating the flag?
Well, I don't know how Wes knows that everybody who hangs the flag up thinks what he says they think. I just don't know that. I think on the point about immigration and the economy, it's very interesting that the audience put up their hands in the proportions they did, and it would be a completely different proportion if the audience was frankly poorer. Because the people who feel the pinch of immigration are people already living in this country of whatever colour who feel that it works against them. And the other big, partly this is to do with jobs, but it's also very much to do with public services, which haven't been mentioned so far. There's a queue for lots of public services. And if more and more people keep coming in, some of them in emergent situations, like illegal migrants, jump that queue, as a matter of fact. But even if they don't jump it, they're in it. So the queue gets longer, and the ill feeling becomes greater. And I think this all gets exposed when, as already been said, people are getting generally poorer or not getting richer. So they start to mind about all these things. And these are prejudices involved, but these are very genuine worries. And the other point is that politicians have been incapable of controlling it. They say they will do things, and this is true both of the economy and of immigration, and then they don't, and they fail. And obviously the most salient point about that in relation to immigration is illegal immigration, which is a small part of the whole, but is nevertheless very, very big. And I'll just say one other thing. We do believe in ourselves as a culture that welcomes migrants and so on. But I've seen a very strange effect, and we all have now, of mass migration going wrong and actually affecting that culture. So one of the things we were proudest about is how we changed our attitude to Jews. We, after all, expelled them in the Middle Ages. We brought them back in the 17th century. They began to thrive and become an enormous part of our culture in the 19th and 20th century. And now Britain's Jews are terrified living in this country. And what are they frightened of? They're mainly frightened of ill feeling that comes from other immigrants. That's the reality of the situation. They are frightened by Muslim extremists who unfortunately, though they're by no means a majority of Muslims, have a real salience in the Muslim community in this country. And Jews will leave soon. So we are leaving now. And how do we let this go wrong?
Can I see if there are any people in the audience who want to answer specifically or make a point specifically on what we've just heard in the last couple of minutes? OK, not yet.
There's Emily, there's
sorry,
someone at the back.
Go for it, yeah. Just if you can keep your statement short or questions.
Yes, yeah. I just want to make the comment about the flag. I am the daughter of immigrants, and I don't find the cross or the Union Jack threatening. But what I do find is a Palestinian flag very threatening. And I think the British flag is being held flown in a response to that.
Wes?
So I'd say both are linked, and so we had Palestinian flags flying regularly from the lampposts in my constituency and right across East London, and
did you object to that?
Yes, one of the things that really depressed me is that even when explaining to people who were supportive of the flags being flown, that those flags make our Jewish neighbours feel uncomfortable and, at worst, afraid and scared, there was no empathy or in response to that. And yet,
can I just ask you technically, if the government is now recognising Palestine as a country, doesn't that legitimise then the waving or the hanging of the flag?
Well, firstly, in Britain we don't do politics on lampposts, and I think that is a good thing, and we should not be using lampposts to kind of do our politics, and worse still, to sort of make people feel uncomfortable on the streets where they live. And so I don't find our country's flag offensive, far from it. And as I said, if during the World Cup, during the Euros, for any other kind of major event, flying our flag is a great thing. In fact, I'm very lucky to work in an area where pretty much every day there are flags everywhere and it looks amazing. And I think London, the Mall never looks better than when it is covered in the Union flag. It is brilliant. But that's not how people felt when they were being hung from lampposts and the politics that sat underneath it, and we should acknowledge that. And one of the things that I was discussing with some of my Jewish community leaders and constituents on Friday, following obviously the horrific attack in Manchester and the direct impact that has had on Anglo Jewry, I hope that we can build a stronger sense of understanding and empathy between people who know what it is to experience racism or discrimination on the basis of their faith or their culture, but nonetheless can be perpetrators of the same racism or discrimination against others, despite knowing what it feels like to be a victim of it. And I think that's the sort of political leadership that we need, not just from politicians, actually, but from faith leaders and from community leaders across the country.
Charles, I know you want to come back. I'm just looking for our second questioner, who is Nick Bennett. So if Nick, great. If we can just get a mic to Nick, and Charles, you want to come back?
I just say, not everyone may be aware here of Wes's situation in his own constituency, and I say this because it'll make it clear that he's saying something which appears to be quite normal, but actually quite brave for him to say.
It's true.
Because he's under threat from the Gaza extremists in his constituency. And the trouble is that though Wes is brave, I don't think the government of which he's a part is very brave about this. I think that they are allowing their foreign policy to be dictated by the fears of losing votes from elements of their support. And that's why they recognise the statehood of Palestine, even though the place doesn't exist as a state. And that was not a good reason, and we're going to see more of this. And it's very, very bad, and I find it quite alarming.
Can I tell you why I just disagree? So that's an important point, an important challenge. And I've had quite a bit of this of, oh, well, you're only saying X or Y or Z about what's going on in Gaza because you've got a majority of 528 and you're just trying to shore up your own seat. Well, firstly, I think regardless of where we are in recognition, regardless of what we said on Gaza, the people who tried to take me out at the last general election are coming for me at the next general election as well. And actually, whether it's on recognition or other things that I've said about Israel's actions in Gaza, the risk to me is actually the opposite. The people who did vote for me at the last election will be quite annoyed and might not next time. So why have I said these things? Why has the government set out the position that we have? Because we think it's the right position. And, you know, I say this as someone who has been a long-standing friend of Israel for many years. I don't think my position has actually changed. I do think the politics of Israel has changed. And I think that when you have got former prime ministers like Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert speaking out in the way that they have about the actions of the government of Israel, I think that's where I think we need to be a bit more nuanced and a bit less uncritical, actually. And it's difficult because we know, you know, Israel is a democracy, Israel is an ally. We want ultimately Israel to thrive as a successful democracy. But however horrific October the 7th was, however unimaginable the grief of the families who've been without their loved ones for so long, and however real the threat is to Israel's existence when you look at the neighbourhood it's in and how many of Israel's neighbours would quite happily see Israel wiped off the face of the earth, none of those things can be used to justify the scale of innocent life that's been lost in Gaza. And I genuinely think and have believed throughout my entire kind of time being interested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, always believed that a two-state solution is the only solution, not just to give the Palestinians the same right to self-determination, peace and security that we would want for ourselves, but also because I think it's in Israel's interest as well in terms of Israel's future success, survival and thriving. And I hope to see that Israel return to its founding values, which I think have been absent in terms of how the present government has conducted itself.
We're going to go to Nick just to get a few more questions in.
Thank you. 50 years ago, when Mrs. Thatcher took over as leader of the opposition, Britain was said to be in terminal decline. Is Britain in 2025 in a better or worse state than 1975? And obviously, apart from Wes and Alex, is there a Thatcher for our times?
Charles.
Well, there was a famous, I've just written about it in this morning's Telegraph, there was a famous article in the Wall Street Journal in April the 29th, 1975, which said, "Goodbye, Britain, it's been nice knowing you." And it was based on telling this story of complete economic decline. And I just reread it. It is spookily similar to where we are now in almost every respect. You could almost, except you need to update all the figures for inflation, you could essentially reprint the article today. And we definitely have gone well astray. And one of the reasons, of course there are many, is that we have not got a political leader or political party who wants, as they say in the City of London, to kitchen sink the problem. You have, in order to put it right, you have to say, first of all, what's wrong in a very clear way, and then you find your way through it. And that is what Margaret Thatcher did as she became leader in 1975. And she had 4 years in opposition before she could start to implement what she thought in 1979, and she made good use of those 4 years.
Do you see anyone in the wings?
Well, no, but I think that Kemi Badenoch made a good shot at it this week to begin. I think she, and actually the criticisms of her that are made now are very similar to the ones that were made of early Margaret Thatcher. She's too shrill, she's ignorant, she's a woman. Well, I don't quite say she's a woman, but you know, with the sort of hints about that. Narrow, strident, that sort of thing. And it was very similar, but the point is, I can't believe that we can be going on so long now, because it really is a long time, where both main parties have not even quite admitted the scale of the problem. And therefore, if you don't admit it, you don't rethink it, and you don't produce the right policies, and you don't explain what you're doing. And I haven't the faintest idea what Sir Keir Starmer thinks he's doing with our economy now. He can't explain it.
Emily, from a sort of business perspective, do you think that we are in a state of irreversible decline?
No, we're not, and it's a British sport to sort of self-flagellate ourselves and how awful it is, and you can tell a very, very negative story about Britain. It's not terminal decline at all. Just look at we're a cultural powerhouse for a start around the world. There are things that Britain do best and are internationally respected for it. But we are not going to get out of this hole. The government is right when it says economic growth is the only way we possibly can. But it is also wrong to suggest that the government can somehow create economic growth. It's not governments that create growth, it's people that create growth. And the thing I have always found with some of my dear friends in the Labour Party is they don't quite philosophically sort of understand the risk and reward model you need for people to sort of do well and make money. The discussion about wealth in the Labour Party is always about how you tax it, not how you grow it.
Yeah.
Wealth is, we have to actually promote wealth creation. And one aspect, I think, when the government got in, and I entirely understand politically why it did it, but effectively won and said, gosh, things are even worse than we thought. There's huge black holes. We have to make these very difficult decisions. The problem is international investors, they notice this. They think, gosh, things really are much worse. And Britain to be an attractive place for people to deploy capital, to invest in businesses, to help our chronic levels, our underinvestment levels that we've faced, we sort of have to start telling ourselves a better story. So as much as I say there are things that are terribly that are huge issues in the British economy that we have to fix, productivity, etc., we can do all of these things. We have to start telling ourselves a credible story about why we need to grow wealth and telling the world why this is a place that people can do it and do well here and not attack success.
Can I borrow your hands again? Which of you would agree that the country has become ungovernable and in irreversible decline? Put your hand up if you think that is true. Okay. So most of you would say that does not apply. Alex?
So I think you answered three questions. Is the country in decline? Yes. Is it terminal? No. And is there someone who can fix it? Yes. And which I hasten to add is not me. But Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does sometimes rhyme. And here we are, really, unless something changes quite soon, heading towards a sort of IMF bailout situation, in that we are spending more money than we can afford. We are borrowing a lot of money at a high and increasing interest rate. And I very much hope that the Chancellor doesn't do this next month, but it looks very much as though her solution to that problem is going to be to increase the burden of taxation again. We have the second highest burden of taxation since the war, second highest burden of taxation ever in peacetime, and you cannot tax your way to growth. It is impossible. And I think everyone in this room would probably agree, whilst we might disagree on what the level of taxation should be and what it's spent on, we would probably all agree that you shouldn't spend a lot of money that you don't have. That's not a good idea. And so we're going to have to break out of this paradigm. Because this is a literary festival, I'll quote you something that, one of my favourite lines from Philip Larkin, not a poem, an interview that he did with The Observer in 1979, when he was asked, what do you think of Margaret Thatcher? And he said, oh, I adore Margaret Thatcher, which was quite a thing for a poet to say in 1979. This idea, suddenly politics makes sense to me again. This idea that if you can't afford something, well, you can't have it, is something that the country's forgotten, and it needs to remember it again. I think we're in exactly the same place. And Charles is right. It's incumbent on politicians to have that conversation openly, and that we haven't been too party political so far. Without being too party political, that's exactly what Kemi Badenoch was starting to set out in her conference speech about saving money in order to be able to reduce taxes, in order to be able to get growth, in order to be able to get out of the funk.
I just had a question, which is, do you think people are ready for that discussion? Because it's quite easy to say we need to start having these difficult discussions, but it's actually going to be incumbent on people to start changing behaviour, to not have the things that they have not got used to having. Are people ready for the argument?
I have generally, and I've stood in several elections, and I've generally found to my surprise and delight, that when you are prepared to engage in straight talking with the voting public, most people get it. You know, most people understand that you can't spend more money than you have. Most people understand that if you drive wealth creation out of the country, that's a bad thing. Most people understand that the wealth of the country comes from the private sector, and you've got to look after the private sector. So if you're not prepared to tell those stories, then of course you'll get a different. If you start the conversation in a different place about what would you like to have and what would you like to keep, you'll get a different set of answers. But fundamentally, the answers to the problems are in front of us all, and I think that there is a degree of consensus around.
I'm going to bring in another question, because I think this is relevant to the conversation we're having. Is Emma Bannister-Dean here? Emma, can you just give us your question?
Why are small business owners not deemed worthy of the title working people, when it seems to those of us in that position that we work far longer hours than we did when we were employees? We can't raise our incomes to keep pace with inflation due to market sensitivity to price rises. We're trying to create the growth that the economy so badly needs, and we pay a huge burden in taxes. It feels rather insulting.
So, Wes, and I guess Emma will be speaking very conscious that the national insurance contributions on employers came in last year. And for that reason, somebody who's got a small business is not a worker. They are an employer. I mean, how do you justify that?
Well, look, firstly, I don't think, in terms of the choices that we've made, that those choices were made with a view to saying that people in your position and other small business owners do not work hard and do not contribute enormously to this country's success. Quite the opposite. We made specific promises at the general election about income tax, national insurance, VAT. We're keeping to those choices. But back to the challenge of sort of straight talking, when we came in, the country was in a mess, and by the way, the challenges are still there. Like, we haven't magically seen them away after just over a year in government. And we walked into a broken economy, broken public services, and broken trust in politics itself. And we're trying to do something which I think no incoming government has had to do before, which is fight on all three of those fronts fundamentally. We had to put some taxes up. That's not something that we wanted to do, not least because we are conscious that the tax burden in this country was already at record high levels when we came into government. But we had to raise the money needed to be able to do the things that the country needs us to do. And
should Emma be nervous that this coming budget, she might be hit again as a small business owner?
No, I don't think so, because I think that the choices we've made, we haven't made lightly, and without recognising the impact that it does have on people and on businesses. And we know that, and that's why there's a responsibility to make sure that money is spent wisely. It's why, sort of, in some ways, paradoxically, we've got £26 billion more going into the NHS. But if you talk to some NHS leaders, they will tell you it doesn't always feel like that, because at the same time as we're putting £26 billion more in, I've also taken just over 10 billion out of where money was already being spent, because I didn't think it was being spent effectively enough. And we're making different choices, and we've got to do both investment and reform to deliver better outcomes in public services, better outcomes for the people who use the service, but also better value for the taxpayers who are paying for it. And that's got to be true across the board. We are spending an awful lot of your money, and we owe it to you to spend it as carefully as I suspect you are having to spend it when running your businesses and running your payroll. So we've got to do that. I think this country faces an enormous amount of jeopardy. I don't feel pessimistic about the country's future, but I do feel anxious about it, because we've got deep structural problems in our economy. We had over a decade of low productivity, low growth, and therefore you end up with a high burden of taxation, and people paying more through their taxes and feeling they are getting less because they are.
How much of the low productivity do you put at the door of Brexit?
It's part of it. Look, I mean, there's no doubt that that's the other problem we're dealing with. I'm glad that Brexit is a problem whose name we now dare speak.
Well, it isn't very often, is it? I mean, not particularly by your government.
Well, I read in the Times that we're today that we're talking about it now, so I'm delighted.
Right, so you're allowed to.
It's look, this has been my frustration about it. I have enormous respect for people whose principal argument around Brexit was take back control, let's exercise sovereignty. We don't want to be part of the European Union. That was, a legitimate choice that we gave to people as Parliament, and they exercised it on the basis they did. But we were warned it was going to have an economic impact. And it has. And it's hit our country hard. So we're having to deal with Brexit, we're having to deal with the structural problems in the British economy, and we are doing that by creating stability and the conditions in which people can invest confidently in our country, recognising, as Emily says, governments don't create growth, but we can help to create the conditions for businesses to grow and thrive, and that's what we've got to do. We are also trying to take advantage of the trading opportunities that we have. And the trade deals we've struck with the US, for example, has saved thousands of jobs at Jaguar Land Rover. The trade deal we've just struck with India, a famously protectionist economy, I think is a real diplomatic triumph for the government. And we're also trying to have a more rational conversation with our biggest and nearest trading partners, the European Union, by resetting that relationship and beginning to build back what we have lost. None of these things are easy. But at the same time, I think we all wander around a bit too much talking about hard and tough choices if this is an enormous burden that we didn't ask for. Well, we asked people to vote for us at the last general election, and they did. And I'm glad, because it's quite fun being in government, actually, truth be told. But it's also really rewarding, because we've got an opportunity to try and shape this country for the better, to make it more fair, more equal, more just, more safe and secure, and able to exercise influence in terms of the pursuit of our values on the global stage. And there are green shoots of recovery, whether that's 5 cuts in the interest rates, wages growing in the first 10 months of this government more than they did in the last decade, but I wouldn't pretend for a moment that we're out of choppy waters. There's still a lot more to do.
I want to get a couple more questions in. Is Bruce Carrington here with us? Bruce, let's get a mic to you. And can I also check, is Maria Martin here? Maria, right. I'd like both of you to ask these questions because they're both about, well, you'll see. If we hear from Maria first and then Bruce, is that okay? Or Bruce, if you've got the mic, why don't you go for it?
The UK is perceived as having a stagnant economy, an ageing population and lacking innovation. Has the time come to fund the NHS solely via national insurance, with extra monies borrowed from the city and people willing to pay more?
So more of a sort of Ireland-style health service where it's primarily through general taxation and then subsidised each time you go to a GP, subsidised user fees. Maria, could you give us yours at the same time?
So mine was, given the difficulty of employing care workers and the strain on the NHS, how realistic is the idea of robots providing care for the sick, old and vulnerable?
Right, so I want to roll our health questions into one. In Japan, you have robots that can actually turn people onto their sides to stop them getting bed sores. Is that something, Wes, that you could imagine us employing? We go down the AI robot route.
So look, on both, I mean, both the questions are related, actually. The problem with the NHS isn't the model of funding. In fact, it is the equitable basis of the funding of the NHS since 1948 that means that when people fall ill, they never have to worry about the bill. And I think that is a good thing in principle. In practice, countries that have other types of system, whether a US-style system or an insurance-based system, have far more what's the word I'm looking for? Frictional costs built in. So in terms of, all of those transactions, all of those interactions, the billing system, all the rest of it. So, so the NHS ought to be, both in principle and in practice, the most efficient way of funding and providing healthcare. However, ironically, we do not make nearly enough of the benefits of a single-payer system. In terms of things like procurement and in terms of how the service is organised. But fundamentally, what we need to do is shift from where we are today, which is a late diagnosis, inefficient system that gets you too late, worse for the patient, more expensive for the taxpayer, to one that diagnoses earlier and treats faster. And thanks to the revolution in life sciences and medical technology, we will not only be able to diagnose earlier and treat faster, but increasingly to predict and prevent illness. And that is a paradigm shift in healthcare, and one that insurance-based systems will really struggle to deal with. Because the moment you
let
can
me get the
predict
other
illness,
panellists onto this
how do you
one.
possibly insure? But so finally,
Wes, just hold on, just hold on. Okay, just hold on.
Point about robots turning people over, because that's an important point. Health and care will always be a people-based service. I really believe that. We can definitely...
No robots. Is that going to be your statement?
Of course, I mean, there are robots. We've got drones flying drugs from one London hospital to another. So I definitely think that robotics have really big role to play, not just in terms of surgery, but in terms of the efficiency of the service. But ultimately, those caring roles, are they going to be ones that androids are going to be performing? Not in my lifetime, I think.
Charles, is there a place where the NHS moves to something that is more, I don't know if you'd call it more fit for purpose, or where people are asked to pay?
One point I make relating to robots, which may help to explain, is that robots don't go on strike. And one of the things that we
Something
have...
really interested in these robots. Tell me more.
And one of the things that is basically where I think Wes is profoundly wrong about the National Health Service is that it is and was from the beginning, for all its good intentions, constructed in a way that benefits the people who operate it rather than the people who receive the treatment, because they are disempowered throughout. And the point about insurances, of course I agree with three of the point of views, and nobody sane would say that if you're a poor person you shouldn't be able to get health treatment. But if you have systems, and by the way, the only other system in the civilized world which is at all like ours is Canada. All the others are not like ours. It's a very out-of-date system, and it's incredibly bureaucratic. And I think every single person in this room will have discovered how you can't get what you want in the National Health Service. And it's usually not so much the pure medical treatment, but it's the secondary thing, like have all the times been muddled up? Do you have to go to another hospital? You turn up at a different time. What's happened to your records? Where's your urine sample? Did somebody look at it? Come back later. We happily became a grandfather. My wife and I became grandparents again last week. And actually, no, sorry. We didn't. We were supposed to, but thanks to National Health Service, we became grandparents this week because my daughter-in-law went into. She was told to go and have a cesarean at 7 in the morning. She was. It was all booked. She was still there at 7 in the evening, and it hadn't happened. So they sent her away. It's Friday, so that's those 3 days when you're not allowed to eat for 24 hours because of the anaesthetic. You're quite important to you when you're having a baby. Pretty terrible thing. Not medically terrible, but terrible.
Yeah.
And she went in on Monday, and praise be, a lovely large boy who's called Christian, which I hope won't be held against him in the future. These problems are really impossible to remedy under a system such as we have, because there is no consumer sovereignty to put it in.
So would your kitchen sink person just absolutely cut through the NHS?
Well, the thing I've noticed in our time is that when I used to say how bad the health service was on programmes like this gathering today, 30 years ago, everybody booed, and now nobody does. Because they know how terrible it is. And it's not the fault of this government particularly, it's the fault of all governments who are completely out-of-date approach to how you deal with a sophisticated public.
Shall we just do a quick show of hands? Who here would prefer to move to something which was taxpayer subsidised but with an insurance sort of payment? Gosh.
This really
Does
is
that surprise
unrepresentative
you?
of the country. No, look, the public are really, a general public are absolutely consistent on where they are. All I'd say is that on the current NHS model, we managed to deliver the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in history. When I became Health Secretary last year, the reverse was true. The model of funding was the same. What changed between 2010 and 2024?
Okay.
The one thing I'll say, if I could just on the, having said we need to be positive, one aspect of British society, we are not a healthy country. We have levels of unhealth that are far beyond our European peers, and we are not going to help solve our structural problems in the NHS unless we have a fundamental sort of realisation of all of the aspects of it, food, ultra-processed food, you name it. And I know you mentioned social care. We can't really have a discussion about the NHS without talking about social care, and I'm afraid yet again we seem to be pushing this enormous question if we're ready for hard and difficult discussions, then this is absolutely the area we have to be ready to have on hard and difficult discussions, because the situation is completely unsustainable, not least because of our demographic challenge.
I'm going to bring in some more just general hands. Yeah, if we get some mics. If Nigel Foster's here, we'll come to you just at the end. Are you Nigel? No, fine. Yeah, go for it.
Poor old Nigel.
Hi. I'd just like to say that I'm a consultant. I've worked in the NHS for more than 30 years. And I'm sorry, Wes, but you are completely wrong. The tax-based funding leads to chronic wastage. Nobody understands the value of anything. It's grossly inefficient. And the sooner we move to a system where insurance companies control the flow of money, the better. And also, I'm afraid, the other kind of golden pillar of free at the point of use is also wrong, because that leads to terrible abuse of the system. And I've seen it every day for the last 30 years.
Thanks very much, sir. Yeah, there's a hand here. Just a lady with the green band, yeah.
I have to say I agree with Nigel, but my question or comment was, I've seen a lot of corner shop consultancies springing up. I don't know if you've noticed this. I'm sure you have in the audience. But lots of doctors or consultants are forming little sort of corner shop private practices where they're asking people to come in if you want to have any diagnostics or any consultations. Are you aware of this? Is it going to be a two-tier NHS where some people do this? Or even, I've also noticed that some NHS hospitals obviously have, like, maybe on the third floor, a private wing or private suites.
Yeah.
Is that where we're moving to?
Okay. Any other hands on while we're staying on this subject? Yes, sir. Different subject. Go on, throw it in anyway.
There was some reporting recently about the fact that crime statistics are going down, but perception of crime is increasing. And I wondered whether you have any thoughts on social media's role in causing maybe that perception gap.
Great. Okay. So let's just deal with the corner shop question first. Is it a problem if there are these sort of individual practitioners springing up and charging for health? I mean, do you have a problem with that?
Well, we have a two-tier system in this country because those who can afford it are paying to go private. Lots of people who, by the way, can't afford to go private are also borrowing or putting costs on their credit card to go private in order to be seen. And that's one of the reasons why I've been very strongly advocating using the independent sector to bring down waiting lists. Because my view is if the capacity exists in the independent sector, then so long as it's provided to the patient free at the point of use via the NHS, there's no reason why we shouldn't use that spare capacity to bring down waiting lists. It's the right thing pragmatically to do that, but also it's the right thing in principle to make sure that those who can't afford to go private aren't left behind. I don't think it's the right long-term solution, and I do think that a system that is privatised is one that doesn't work for the interests of equity, fairness and the patient. I can well understand why consultants looking across the United States might favour that model. They do really well out of it. But that's not a kind of model I want to see here. On the crime thing briefly,
I'll tell you what, let me let Alex answer the crime one. Just if we can go to you, Alex. Do you recognise that sometimes we talk up problems that aren't actually as real as they may be because of the way algorithms on social media happen?
Oh, sometimes, certainly. But I think as far as crime's concerned, there are certainly parts of the country where crime is very high. And if you want to compare London to, say, Essex, where I live, crime has been going down in my area, apart from car crime, which has been going up because...
So it's carjacking and mobile phones, isn't it?
So it's not in Essex. No, we don't do carjacking. Not our thing. But no, what we have in Essex is that we've got some very entrepreneurial criminals who work. A new Range Rover will come out, and some clever chap will work out how to hack into the super clever secure system, and they'll go down a road, unlocking them and driving them off to Harwich and putting them on ferries and taking them onto the continent. And that's very irritating because it drives up everybody's insurance premiums. But the rest of crime is going down in Essex. In London, in certain parts of London, it's really not the case. In certain parts of London, acquisitive crime is very high and has been normalised.
So just to clarify, acquisitive means mainly stealing mobile phones. It doesn't mean violent crime.
No, well, there might be a violent element to it, but yeah, if you push someone off their bike and nick their watch, but also if you go in, and this isn't violent crime, if you go into a supermarket and you clear it out of alcohol and meat and nobody does anything about it, and somebody films it, one of the reasons that this has caught the public imagination is because the public know it's happening.
Yeah.
The public have seen it happening, and we have to stop it. We have to have a much more sort of what was called a broken windows policy, which is you clamp down on anything, no matter how small. You clamp down to tell the criminals that there is no place for them.
I live in London. Every week I will have a friend that has had a mobile phone stolen and can't then track it and to your point feel like nothing is being done because they can see where it's gone, it's not immediately tackled. I know that the various police forces are trying to change that. The other aspect of crime that it may not be so immediately obvious, but whether it's Marks and Spencer or JLR, the cyber criminals who are preying on our cyber vulnerabilities is a tremendously significant issue that we have seen cause extreme difficulties and havoc for private sector companies. And this battle is only getting worse. The people that are out there trying to destabilise and cause difficulties for our private sector businesses and indeed our government agencies and parts of the public sector are huge. And we are far more vulnerable than we like to think. And I'm afraid we have to have a conversation with ourselves about the level of resource and investment that is going to be needed to protect ourselves and our businesses and our public sector organisations online.
Can we just go back to you? Why did you raise that question specifically? Do you think that we get taken down rabbit holes?
I think maybe social media is contributing to perhaps a perception gap. I'm not sure. I'm just curious. I wonder if that's the case.
Well, violent crime's fallen, but I go back to Alex's point, which is, on the shoplifting front, there's a parade of shops in my constituency where shoplifting has effectively been decriminalised. Because people can walk in, and it's always the same people, and they walk in, they clear the shelves in Boots, they clear the shelves in the supermarkets, and the small independent businesses, and it is killing them. And worse than that, it's making people feel like their area isn't as nice any longer, their community isn't as nice any longer. And I think there's a general sense of loss of control. Why aren't we taking the... And it's, I'm afraid this is definitely the responsibility of government and the police to sort in terms of deterrence and arrests and prosecutions. That is definitely our responsibility. But I also think as society we need to take more responsibility as well. And I know sometimes...
Would you encourage the public to try and stop a shoplifter?
If it feels safe, and there's definitely at least one have-a-go hero in this room who did that recently that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there'll be others too. But it's also like basic manners as well, And I know it sort of drew a bit of ridicule when the Lib Dems talked about people playing their music loud on the bus, but they were absolutely right. And also when the Liberal Democrats, the ones moaning about, people freedom to play their music on the bus, you've got a real problem. There's a general problem in our society at the moment where a small minority of people get away with antisocial behaviour and they do it with impunity, and fellow passengers on the bus or fellow shoppers in the supermarket are afraid to intervene because they fear the consequences, and they also know if they call the police, no one will come. That's the culture that's got to change.
We've got a couple more questions. Charles, did you want to come in quickly, or should we go to the other questions?
Just think one thing I've noticed about criminals nowadays is that they assert what they believe to be rights. So I've seen film of this when videos in shops, the shopkeeper tries to grab the thief and they say, you're doing him an assault on me. And actually, this has happened to me when I tried to make a citizen's arrest on a chap, unfortunately two chaps.
Are you the have-a-go
no,
hero? Is there another?
That's the second one.
There are two.
who were coming.
Is everyone here a have-a-go hero? That's why we're here.
They was my stupidity because I didn't realise there were two of them at the right time. I thought it was one. And they were coming down the wrong, the usual thing, all these cyclists who go wrong way down the one-way street. So I said, please don't do that. And so they ignored me. So I got the handlebars of one of them and said, you're not allowed down here. It's against the law. And he said, I'll do you for assault, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, I couldn't continue the argument because then his very threatening friend came over and I ran away, as of course you calculate.
You should have said to him.
Let's go to this lady here. Yeah.
And until that last bit, I never thought I'd say this. I'd actually vote for you. It's amazing.
He's got a very
Well,
safe seat.
here and this lady there.
It seems to me that we have two problems that one could solve the other. We have so many shoplifting, phone stealing, etc., cars. But we also have police going to people's houses when they've posted something that is disagreeable to other people. Why can't somebody at the top, I don't know if it should be the Home Secretary or every police chief, why don't they say to their police officers, you don't have time to talk about somebody's posting. You need to focus on actual shoplifting, phone theft, etc.
Okay, thanks. And this lady?
I just wanted to return to what people were talking about earlier about whether we've returned to kind of the situation pre-Margaret Thatcher. And is it not a little bit naive to think that things could be the same given the insane new challenges we're facing around climate change and potentially the kind of autocratic ideologies behind a lot of big tech, which feel like really important new challenges that haven't really been talked about tonight?
So do you think this is a worse time than 79 or a...
I just think we should be maybe thinking in very different ways and thinking in more radical ways about what needs to change in order to face these problems.
Okay, any other questions just before we, on that one? Who wants to answer that one? I'm going to open it up to the panel. Are we just thinking in a far too old-fashioned way about the real things that are coming at us in 2025?
It was ever thus. I mean, a guy went to see Queen Elizabeth I to get a patent for the stocking frame knitting machine, I think in 1589, and he was turned down because Queen Elizabeth I was concerned that the use of this technology would render her subjects useless, thus making them beggars, to quote Elizabeth I. And that concern about technology and impact on the labour market is a tale as old as time. And I think there are lots of big challenges we're facing today that feel new and novel, but when you strip them down to their core, they're fundamentally at heart the same sorts of challenges we've always faced. And the question is, what kind of values are going to drive these trends? So in this, the technological revolution we're now about to embark, I think it's like the best of times and the worst of times. And there is a real choice between dystopia and utopia, and we'll probably land somewhere in the middle. But we've got to make sure that in terms of the values that we apply to these challenges, that we've got the right approach. We want that revolution to serve the interests of the many, not just the privileged few.
Well, I think Wes maybe misunderstanding the question. I don't think the question was objecting to technological change, objecting to the power of big tech, which is a different matter. And I think that we do have a big problem here about the power of unanswerable and often international bodies or foreign powers as well. So big tech is a very serious problem about who's in control of it. China is a very serious problem and how it's trying to control us. And I'm afraid, I think at present, our government feels so weak, and it's not unique in this, many Western governments are like this, that they kowtow more to these big entities than they do to people like Emma, who asked the question about small businesses. And the small person is not doing well out of the present situation. But, we're so desperate for a trade deal with China that we don't dare charge people who have been spying for it, or may have been spying for it. And we're so desperate for to have the right market access with the American big tech companies that we don't submit them to the same rules as other people. I think the answers are not easy, but these are very legitimate and very current concerns.
Okay, we've got 1 minute left, and I'm going to ask Nigel Foster's question, I think in his absence. Forgive me if you're here, Nigel. Should Donald Trump have won the Nobel Peace Prize? Very quick answer from the panel. I know that applications actually closed in January. But that aside, would anyone on the panel have awarded Donald Trump the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, I think he may be in the running for next year.
Yeah. In some ways, I hope he wins next year if it's proven that what has somehow become negotiated turns out to something genuinely real and lasting.
Would Does anyone disagree
Well,
with that?
also, we know he really wants it. So if he thinks he's going to get it next year, he will exert every bit of influence he can
to make it work.
to maintain the peace that he has so skillfully
this
negotiated.
This is the last one to you. Could you put your hand up if you would like to see Donald Trump honoured with the Nobel Peace Prize in a year's time?
We're more divided on it.
I have promised to let Emily Benn go because she has a honeymoon to take. So thank you